I'm Dave Rutherford. The Maverick Party was launched in September of 2020 as a voting alternative for Western Canadians to address the gaps in representation in Ottawa that has led to a lot of frustration in Western Canada. The Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP, all vying for votes in Central Canada, where the majority of the votes are. Maverick is committed to having the freedom to truly represent the West by running only in Western Canada. They've been branded the West's only federal party. Former BC MP and Cabinet Minister Jay Hill has held the role of interim leader since the party's inception. And now the party is having a leadership race to elect a full-time leader. Today, I'm talking to Colin Krieger, a Maverick candidate in the last federal election in 2021. He ran in Peace River, Westlock. Colin, thank you very much for joining us today. Good to see you again. Let's look back a little bit before we get into more about the details of where you want to go in the future. Let's look back a little bit at that last election campaign. It was a challenge for everybody in the Maverick Party to, I suppose, get noticed, first of all, but in the middle of a pandemic, the difficulty in making connections with people. Looking back at it, Colin, are there things that you think might have gone differently, been done differently? We do a bit of an autopsy on that campaign. What do you think happened?
Well, first, I want to say thank you, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. As a young man, I'm no longer a young man. I had the opportunity to hear you in the past on the radio, and it's my honor to be able to speak with you and all the listeners today. So, in regards to the last election, I am actually quite pleased with what we accomplished. We have a larger number of volunteers. We have people that are committed. And we have a message that is truly ours. There is no other political party in Canada, let alone the West, but obviously in the West, that has our message, that offers to the voting public what we do. And so I'm really proud of that. And I'm happy to be running for this position.
Talking about the message, I guess the challenge was getting that message out. I mean, I understand a lot of people very receptive when they heard what Maverick stood for, but making the commitment to vote for you and getting some traction in the ridings. What would you do differently if we were going to have another election quickly? And it's possible. What would you do differently?
Well, what is different about this time is that we have a much larger volunteer base available to us. People that voted for us last time, people that will be able to talk with their friends and neighbors. Primarily, that's how this happens at a base level. We also have social media at our disposal. And being able to have a leader that can speak to the voting public with something on the line, I think will make somewhat of a difference.
Go ahead.
Please.
I was just going to say, is the messaging, the process of messaging now, and I think Jay would probably admit this, going back to politics as it was done over the past 30 years, things have changed dramatically with, of course, the internet, social media. And so for you, Colin, is that sort of where some of the new messaging is going to have to come from? It's going to have to be sort of a social media, internet-based kind of messaging?
Oh, I believe it's going to be a mix. You have to have both. Some people would say that politics has changed entirely, and I don't agree with that. You do need to get out there, and you do need to know your constituents. The candidates need to be able to relate to the people in their ridings, but people rely more and more on social media these days, and so you have to be relatable on that medium as well. And so that is the challenge, is to be able to get out there and get noticed amongst all the noise.
The Conservatives, clearly, the federal Conservatives have been the dominant political party generally in the West over many years, and it turns out they dominated again in the last federal election. But we still have this anxiety among Westerners, even though Conservatives were elected to Ottawa. Do you feel that they're not clearly representing Western views?
Well, let me just back up one second. And it is, of course, very true, Dave, that the Conservatives largely won in every riding that they did in the previous election. But what is different in this writing, and I know from other writings as well, is that the percentage by which they did win was much lower. That's due to apathy. That is due to people simply not voting because they don't know who to vote for. They don't feel like they have anybody that represents their views. And they, in my opinion, they just don't know the Maverick Party yet. So we do have a changing demographic inside of the conservative mindset that we can reach. I know that my experience was during the election that everybody I was able to talk to heard the message and loved the message. Now, post-election, what actually happened often was people, in fact, a very good supporter of mine from over by Grand Prairie, just the other day told me, says, I love your message. And I said, okay, that's great. How did you vote? And he somewhat hung his head and said, I had to bite the bullet. Even though I love your message, I voted for the Conservatives with the hope that we could change the federal government away from Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. And then I asked him, and I was very conciliatory, of course. And I said, but how do you feel about that now? And he said to me, he says, like, I have been cheated. He did not get what he wanted. And he is now a Maverick supporter, a staunch Maverick supporter, and I'm proud to have him on my team. And that is how we are reaching our public now, is these people that have obviously seen what has happened now. They have kind of held their breath, they've kind of bit their lip, and they have voted in a way strategically in their mind that would get the best of the worst, is often how I hear it described, and they failed. And now they are wanting to try something else. And that is what the Maverick is. We are the only ones that can offer a voice in Ottawa that is truly and only theirs, that will address things like, a carbon tax, will address things like, it's not even in vogue anymore. People don't talk about it as much, but it's extremely important. Things like Senate reform. Nobody will talk about those kind of things. And why not? It is one of the tools that would change Canadian politics and balance the power so that the people of the West can get a better deal.
Let's talk then about that message you were talking about, people hearing your message. Clearly, Senate reform, including an elected Senate, would be part of that message. But Colin, overall, generally, what is the party's message? What are you saying to people that the Conservatives clearly have not satisfied that Western frustration? What are you saying to them? What is the message?
Well, my message to them would be the same message that has been a part of the Western Canadian vernacular for almost a century. One of the things that I talk about with people is that there's an old cartoon, and it's a very simple cartoon. It's a map of Canada kind of laid on the floor, if you will, with a large cow standing on top of it, and it is being fed in the Western provinces, and it's being milked in the Eastern provinces. And the analogy is apt. People understand it immediately. What most people don't understand is that particular cartoon was first published in 1915, just 10 years.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and it's only 10 years after Alberta joined Confederation when that was penned and published. So my message to Western Canadians is that we have an option.
Even if you get a Conservative government, it doesn't seem like Western views are going to be represented in Ottawa, again, because parties have to somehow appeal to Central Canadians, and they have a different view of the world, don't they?
They certainly do. And Justin Trudeau actually said I do believe it was about 2015, that the that Canada in itself doesn't have a cultural identity of its own. And at the time, that actually annoyed me, because me and the people that live around me, we do have a distinct and an interesting way of looking at the world. But as I grew older and I kind of thought more about that, I realized that he may not have a cultural identity of his own that he would be able to put his finger on, but here in the West, we do. And maybe that's the difference. And I started to realize that the people in the West do indeed have a separate idea of who they are, as opposed to people in the East. And it's because of that we're running into these issues today. You're right in the fact that, of course, all of the vote-rich areas of the East are the ones that national parties need to chase. And the Conservative Party in particular takes our vote for granted. They just, in fact, Aaron O'Toole said, hey, you guys, you need to get with the program, change the way that you think so that you're more palatable to Eastern conservatives. Well, in my opinion, a party should actually represent its people, not the people, its party. And so the Maverick Party is to do that exactly. That's our goal, is to make sure that the cultural distinctness, the people get a voice that they recognize, a voice that they agree with, and will bring their common sense attitude into our national politics, but in a way that we don't have to compromise, which is indeed what's always happened. And well, to compromise is maybe to give us too much credit, because we do all of the compromising by and large in the West. And the Maverick Party is here to make sure that that doesn't continue. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to smile when you're thinking about your federal representatives? And when was the last time that happened?
Looking at then a way to pressure change in Canada from the West. If Maverick gets a real good representation of members of Parliament from the West, part of what you're talking about, and I've seen in the party platform, is some form of autonomy, a way for the West to be a force unto itself. How would you define that?
Well, there's a number of different ways, and different provinces, like here in Alberta, have brought forth a number of recommendations. And here in Alberta, they call it the Fair Deal Panel, and a set of recommendations. And I agree with many of them. Things that I somewhat define it as putting layers of insulation in between the federal layers of jurisdiction and the provincial layers of jurisdiction. And we encourage the provinces to do that, to maintain their provincial autonomy and do things that some other provinces have been doing for decades already. Like in Quebec, we would talk about our own provincial police forces. Not that and by the way, I need to make sure when I say that I don't get pigeonholed a little bit in the fact that I think that the RCMP are bad. I don't. I believe that they are doing a fine job, but the problem is that they are a federal policing force, and we should have provincial policing forces in place in order to, how to say it clearly, is so that they are not conflicted on their mandate. And then we could talk about things like the Canadian pension plan. I believe that we should be pulling out of that, and that the provinces should be instituting their own. I think that would be highly effective and would be something that would be beneficial to the residents of our individual provinces in the West, mainly because of our younger work, the age of our workers, and the higher paying jobs that we have. That would be highly beneficial to us in the West, and we would encourage that. Those are the types of layers of autonomy that we would be talking about, and would decrease the amount of federal bleed into provincial jurisdictions.
You're going to need a bit of a carrot and a stick way. You're going to need some leverage to convince a federal government that in fact the West is serious. How do you go about that? Is it just numbers?
the reason you say a carrot and a stick, and the reason we know that that's true is because of history. And I do want to go back to that real briefly because I can talk about the Reform Party. And I have ultimate huge respect for like our political Western giants like Preston Manning. But I do believe that he made a mistake. Their motto was "The West wants in." And guess what? In 1993, the West did get in, and they had enormous amounts of influence and could have used it long term to benefit the West. Unfortunately, though, they decided after that to go national. They formed the Canadian Alliance. Then they merged with the remnants, what was then the remnants of the Conservative Party of Canada, or I guess it's now the Conservative Party of Canada. And here we are 30 years later, pretty much right back where we started. So you're right in the fact that there has to be a carrot and a stick, because they tried the carrot and there was no stick. The only thing that the West has available to it is the threat of continuing autonomy. We need to make sure that our people, our residents, get the best deal possible. I said it online just the other day, is that every government's main purpose needs to make sure, or it should be, to make sure that the lives of its residents are made better day by day. That's their purpose for existing, is to better the lives of their citizens. And when was the last time that any citizen in Western Canada could say that? And that is what the Maverick Party is going to be fighting for. And that's what I believe thoroughly.
Looking at the provincial landscape now a bit, you're going to have to be talking to premiers of other provinces, political realities in each Western province. You've got Scott Moe is clearly on side. I mean, Scott Moe in Saskatchewan has already endorsed Saskatchewan as a nation. So he seems like he's on side. You've got Manitoba, Alberta, where Jason Kenney, the current UCP government, has not declared that and pretty much has said they will not. Mm-hmm. You may have an NDP government in Alberta if things go a certain way. You've got an NDP government in British Columbia. So what strategies do you think the party needs to do? You've got one maybe on side. What about the others? How do you do that, Colin?
Well, we do need indeed to be able to work with the provincial governments of the day, but we will also be standing very firmly by our principles. We will be, as a federal politician, and particularly if we're not in power, we won't have the Prime Minister's chair. We, though, will have a very large spotlight that we will be able to use to showcase to residents of the West what should be happening. And when those people, I believe, when they see the messaging of what should be happening, they're going to apply pressure to their provincial governments, and it will be the people that ultimately make the difference in those situations. We are here to help them express their views and to unite them in order to get past the division of the day. And that is something else that really is something that I want to talk about during the course of this leadership race, is about division and how we need to align ourselves as Westerners. We have to look past the things that would seek to divide us, that would keep us distracted from the main problems that the West has. We cannot allow ourselves to be distracted by the smaller issues, even though they may be personally, I don't want to make anybody's issues seem like they're small, because they're important, but we do need to look at the big picture, because we have been working on these same sets of problems for more than 100 years. And if we can fix them, a lot of the others will fall into place.
I wonder if there's going to be confusion. There have been some provincial parties that have sprung up over the past few years, especially in Alberta, but elsewhere as well, with their own provincial agendas on what they want to see. If it's going to be a separate Alberta or a separate this, they are out there campaigning too. Mm-hmm. I imagine you have to stay again above those distractions. Is that going to be difficult for some voters to make the distinction?
Yes, that's true. Some people are focused on individual strategies, and I talk with those people all the time. For instance, during the election, I had some people that would say that they simply wanted to secede right now, and that was their belief, and they didn't want to wait. They just. But what I was successful in doing was helping them to realize that just because the area where you live feels very, very strongly about that doesn't mean that every area does. And we need to be united. If we're going to go down a road like that in the future, then it has to be in lockstep with the rest of the province. We cannot go into these types of scenarios divided. It needs to be done together. Whatever we do, we need to make steps. I said this again online some time ago, that some of these steps will be large. There will be some of these things that will happen and they will be large. There will be big steps, like we've already talked about. But other times they will be small steps. They will just be incremental, but we will be working towards the betterment of the West. One thing that we need to realize is that this didn't happen overnight and will not be solved overnight. It is something that we have to be patient. We have to be strong, by the way, though. I've had some people say, well, we can't be weak. We can't just take, we cannot be a doormat anymore, if you will. And I agree with that. We do need to be strong, but we also need to realize that we have to do it in lockstep, and it may take some time.
Well, Colin, listen, you're the first candidate to step up for the leadership of Maverick. And I think we all hope that there are others along the way that will come forward. And so it'll be a real energetic campaign going into the May leadership election. Colin, thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate it. And we'll see you again soon.
Again, the pleasure and the honor was all mine, Dave. You have a good day.
Thank you, Colin.
Bye for now.